Hey everyone, welcome back, Focus Learners, to another explainer. Okay, let's dive right into this, because today we're looking at how single, hyper-localized acts of violence can literally permanently reshape the modern world. We're going to unpack the anatomy of political assassinations, getting into the mechanics, the hidden data, and the massive geopolitical shockwaves that hit when a public figure is targeted. Here's our roadmap for today. 1. A shot changes the world. 2. Motives and deadly methods. 3. The power of a symbol. 4. The global ripple effect. And finally, 5. The assassin's paradox. All right, let's kick things off with Section 1. A shot changes the world. To start us off, we really need to transition from the intimate, chaotic moments of political violence to their massive historical impacts. And that brings us to a core question, right? Why do we remember certain assassinations and entirely forget others? I mean, history is full of monarchs, generals, and officials who were killed, maybe created a temporary succession crisis, only to be completely forgotten a generation later. But then there are those leaders whose sudden deaths permanently shifted the trajectory of global history. Now, what's really interesting about this is the incredible human tragedy captured in just these few words. So picture it. 1901, Pan American Exposition in Buffalo. President William McKinley is greeting the public. An anarchist named Leon Solgush approaches with a revolver hidden under a handkerchief and shoots the president at point-blank range. As the enraged crowd descends on the shooter, literally clawing to tear him apart, McKinley, who is bleeding and gravely wounded, whispers, "Don't let them hurt him." Before the massive political fallout even began, which, by the way, would ultimately put Theodore Roosevelt in office and permanently change the duties of the Secret Service, there was just this chaotic, intensely human moment where a dying leader tried to protect his own assassin. And sometimes that chaos is almost unbelievably amateurish, yet it triggers a total global catastrophe. Take June 28, 1914. Archduke Franz Ferdinand is visiting Sarajevo. In the morning, an assassin literally bounces a bomb off the Archduke's car. It misses. The Archduke just continues his day. But later that afternoon, his driver takes a wrong turn and stalls the car, a car with no reverse gear, by the way, directly in front of another conspirator, a teenager named Gavrilo Princip. Seconds later, Princip fires the fatal shots. Because Ferdinand was basically the one man actively opposing war with Russia, his death removed the absolute last buffer to conflict. Exactly 1 month later, World War I begins. Literally, one wrong turn in a car rapidly ticked down to a global war. Moving on to Section 2, Motives and Deadly Methods. So the core motives behind these acts generally fall into 4 main categories. First up is ideology. John Wilkes Booth, a Confederate sympathizer, assassinated Abraham Lincoln because he violently opposed Lincoln's plans for Reconstruction and the abolition of slavery. Then we have political gain. Princip, who we just talked about, shot the Archduke specifically to help unite South Slav peoples into an independent state. Third is revenge. In 1984, Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was betrayed and assassinated by her own Sikh bodyguards in direct retaliation for a military assault on the Golden Temple. And finally, mental instability. Charles Guido, suffering from severe delusions, shot President James A. Garfield in 1881 simply because he believed he was personally owed a diplomatic post in Paris. Now the methods. They're just as varied as the motives, and they exploit some chilling vulnerabilities. Firearms are definitely the most common, ranging from Booth's Derringer pistol to the shocking 2022 assassination of former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe with a homemade weapon. Poison, on the other hand, offers a terrifying stealth. Bulgarian dissident Georgy Markov was assassinated with a tiny ricin pellet fired from an umbrella. Yeah, an umbrella. While Russian defector Alexander Litvinenko was slipped lethal polonium-210. Explosives, like the tragic suicide bombing that killed India's Rajiv Gandhi, cause indiscriminate devastation. And then, well, there's the brutal, personal intimacy of stabbing, perfectly encapsulated way back in 44 BCE when Julius Caesar was stabbed 23 times by a mob of his own senators. Which brings us to Section 3, the power of a symbol. So the crucial point is that a symbolic figure is someone who embodies a broader political order or ideological movement. When an assassin targets a figure like Martin Luther King Jr. or Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, they aren't just killing a person, right? They're attacking what that person represents. They're detonating a fault line that already runs so deep through society, which is exactly why these events don't just fade into history. They create a lasting, visceral societal rupture. This distinction between an individual and a symbol is vital. If you remove an individual, say an ordinary official, it creates a temporary power vacuum that's quickly filled and moving right along. But if you remove a symbol, you detonate the entire system. Think of Mahatma Gandhi in 1948. He completely embodied the vision of a pluralist, nonviolent India during the immense, overwhelming tension of partition. When Nathuram Godse killed Gandhi, he wasn't just taking out a politician, he was attacking the very concept of Hindu-Muslim reconciliation. Let's shift gears to Section 4, the global ripple effect. And this brilliantly illustrates how different types of governments react to the sudden murder of a leader, based on empirical data spanning over a century. In autocracies, successful assassinations frequently produce sustained moves toward democratic transitions. Repressive regimes are actually the most likely to experience massive institutional shifts. But you really got to pay attention to regimes with informal succession. When there's no clear second-in-command lined up, the power vacuum invites immense factional violence and chaos. Formal successions buffer instability. Informal ones basically guarantee it. Interestingly enough, this data also applies to counterterrorism. The empirical findings here are quite striking. Removing terrorist leaders through targeted killings does not reliably weaken those organizations. Actually, studies show it often totally fails to deter violence and can instead backfire, rallying support for extremist bases and ultimately increasing global fatalities. The shockwaves also hit the economy directly. $100 million. Let that sink in for a second. That is the median loss in market capitalization for multinational firms following the assassination of activists in the global mining sector. It's a massive financial spillover that proves, without a doubt, that violence against political or social figures sends immediate, highly quantifiable shockwaves right through global markets. Let's move forward and see how this builds into permanent institutional change. We see a really clear three-step ripple effect here. First, a high-profile vulnerability is exploited. Second, public shock and massive unrest sweep the nation. And third, permanent security expansions are implemented. We saw this exact pattern when William McKinley's death permanently established the Secret Service's presidential protection role. And we saw it again when the horrifying assassination of JFK in Dallas led to the incredibly strict modern Secret Service protocols we know today. The state's reaction to vulnerability is almost always an aggressive expansion of security. And finally, Section 5, the Assassin's Paradox. There is a profound irony at the very heart of this topic. The assassin's goal is almost always to destroy a movement, preserve an old order, or silence a specific ideology. But the historical result? Often the exact opposite. The victim becomes a martyr. The supporters radicalize. John Wilkes Booth absolutely did not save the Confederacy by killing Lincoln. And Nathuram Godse's bullet didn't destroy Gandhi's legacy. It immortalized his message of nonviolence for generations to come. Because when you kill a symbol, you don't erase what they stood for. You create a rupture. You force an entire society to realign around their permanent absence. The assassination becomes a generative historical event, locking the victim and the conflict into public memory forever. So I'll leave you with this final thought to consider. Do assassinations ever truly achieve their political goals? Or, by pulling the trigger, do they merely accelerate the very changes the killers so desperately hope to stop? It's a paradox that has defined human history for centuries, and it's one that certainly continues to shape our world today. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you next time.